Okay, so we might get started. We have reached around 150 people, and the numbers are still climbing, but a little bit more slowly now, so we can be respectful to your time and start this event. So I want to welcome everybody once again. My name is Carlos Flores. I'm the director for NABERS, and I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the many lands from which we gather here today and all across Australia. I am personally a migrant to Australia, as many of you may know, and I continue to learn and get inspiration from the deep connections that Indigenous Australians have with the land and the environment. And I think it's a source of a big inspiration personally for me. And I would like to pay my respects to the elder past, present, and emerging. Now, we're here to celebrate together about something that I'm personally really excited about. Is the launch of, or the expansion of NABERS to two major sectors of the Australian economy: warehouses and cold stores. And today has been, it's not something that we just started now. It's actually been something a long time in the making, and the result of the combined efforts of a lot of people and a lot of different types of organizations. So I wanted to do like a little bit of a recap of some of the steps that were required for us to be here. And first of all, we actually had industry advocating for a long time about NABERS being expanded to a lot of new additional sectors of the built environment. A lot of that advocacy sometimes dates back all the way to like 4 or 5 years ago, with a lot of industry bodies reaching out to states and jurisdictions and the Commonwealth government asking for that to happen. And then that advocacy resulted on maybe like one of the major breakthroughs in this path was that in 2019, all states, territories, and the Australian government agreed to add the expansion of NABERS in a document called the Trajectory for Low Energy Buildings and Low Emissions Buildings, which is an agreement by all the states. And this was one of the main actions in the building sector about expanding NABERS to a lot of sectors, including warehouses and cold stores. And then in the last 12 months, we've been working very closely with industry, and with a lot of you in this call, capturing a lot of data and input and insights and your feedback to actually create this NABERS tool for warehouses. So it's actually the combined efforts for a lot of you, and I just really appreciate it. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate all your help and assistance during that journey. I think it's a really powerful example of how to make a real difference in sustainability. We really need to use the joint efforts of industry and government working together, coming together and creating initiatives like this where we can build on and drive change together for the next couple of decades. And so I'm extremely thankful and really excited about talking about this day one of what it is, the expansion of NABERS, and the day one for us in a new sector, working with you really closely. Now, let's look very quickly about what we have on the agenda for today on the next slide. So first, we are very fortunate to have an opening address from the Commonwealth Assistant Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Jenny McAllister. And then we know we have some attendees today who are new to NABERS. It's often a mix in events like this. There are people who have been part of NABERS in other sectors and also happen to work in warehouses and cold stores. And often they know a lot about NABERS, but we have a lot of people today that this might be the first time that you hear about NABERS, and that's because NABERS is new to this sector. So NABERS has been around for about 25 years and in other sectors. So we're going to do a brief session about how NABERS ratings work, what is the kind of impact that we've seen in some of those other sectors, and so we can also think about what are some of the things we might see in warehouses and cold stores from this day forward. Then we'll have my colleague Suruchi Patak will take the stage, and she led the team at NABERS who were developing a NABERS for warehouses and cold stores tool for the past year. So Suruchi is going to dive deep into the design process we took to expand our ratings to these sectors, and also, you know, what does this rating tool look like? What does it look like in practice to do one of these ratings? So you're going to get a sense of, in practice, what does this look like on the ground? What do you have to do if you want to participate in NABERS? And then to cap it all off, we have a discussion panel with 3 shining stars of the sustainability movement in buildings and businesses across the Australian economy, Frankie, Muskovic, Lisa Hinde, and Luke Menzel. So all of that to come up later on this. It's a very compressed session, but we have a lot of action happening at this later on today. So first up, we have the privilege to have a Senator and Assistant Minister for Climate Change and Energy in the Commonwealth Government, Jenny McAllister, providing us with an opening address for the lunch today. So we're going to go into that. And Minister McAllister is very passionate about economic change for a just society, creating opportunities for community participation in politics, working towards gender equality, and taking action to reduce our emissions and build a low carbon economy. Minister, over to you.
My name's Jenny McAllister. I'm coming to you today from Ngunnawal country, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Now, I know that today we're joined by a wide spectrum of groups from the property sector. Property professionals, owners of warehouses and cold stores, neighbours, assessors, and the wider energy efficiency community. Congratulations to all of you for all your work and your input in today's announcement. NABERS has been an incredibly successful scheme over the past 2 decades. We've saved over 1 billion in energy bills. We've avoided 9 million tonnes of emissions. Now, of course, NABERS Energy ratings are currently available for offices, shopping centres, data centres, hotels, apartment buildings, public hospitals, retirement living and aged care. And in these industries, often NABERS has become a byword for quality. So I am delighted to announce today the expansion of NABERS into warehouses and cold stores. Often in big organisations, we ask people to do more with less. Now, I am a fan of productivity as much as the next person, but I have always suspected that more with less tends to end up meaning less with less. But I'm here to say with some excitement that when it comes to smart energy policies, we can and we should do more with less. Whether it is NABERS or the National Construction Code or standards on appliances or the investments we are making in small businesses, our policies are about keeping the country moving, just using less energy as we do it. So I know you do so much to keep our country moving, in some cases literally putting food on the table. Freight and logistics underpins the national economy. It's approximately 8.6% of GDP. We've all been through a lot of change in recent years, and we know that changes are not always easy or smooth. But I also know that NABERS has engaged closely with industry on the development of these standards. It's a model of consultation that the Albanese government has been keen to represent from the start. You saw that on display at the Jobs and Skills Summit. We are committed to working with industry and with communities to adapt to change and take advantage of new opportunities. As vital as it is to the economy, this industry is also vital to getting our emissions down. And if we get it right, we can also take the pressure off costs for industry and the energy system. The rate of growth in the sector provides a real opportunity. More square metres of warehouses have been built than any other building type this decade. And that growth is expected to continue. The projected average annual growth for warehouses is the highest of all commercial building sectors. And it means we have a chance to do good. A 1-star improvement from the industry mid-range standard, which is a 3-star facility, taking that up to 4 stars will reduce emissions by close to 24%. A 2-star improvement will reduce emissions by nearly 47%. The task of reducing emissions is an enormous effort across the nation. From building renewable energy sources, the poles and wires to get the power to where it needs to be, the transition to electric vehicles. It is an essential national effort to secure our future, and every little bit counts. The expansion of NABERS into cold stores and warehouses is great news. It means that this sector is joining in on the broad effort of industry, businesses large and small, and communities across the country in securing the future of our energy system, our economy, and our climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for those highly inspirational words. I think as someone who's working with state and Commonwealth ministers, I think we're very fortunate to have an assistant climate change and energy minister with the kind of experience that Minister McAllister has. And some of you may not know this, but before running for office, she actually held senior roles in climate change and energy and buildings, both in the public sector as well as an industry. And having a minister with that kind of experience and understanding of sustainability very early on in her mandate is an absolute asset at a time when we need a lot of action in climate change, and we have great challenges that we need to tackle. So very exciting times ahead, and thank you so much again, Minister. And on that line, I also want to thank our fellow public servants in the Commonwealth Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, or DQ. That's a new name of the department. And the name of your department might be new, but your commitment to supporting NABERS is not. The Commonwealth government has been supporting NABERS unwavering for 2 decades by this point. And one of the many ways in which they express that and demonstrate that commitment is by funding this expansion project. The Commonwealth government funded the expansion of NABERS to warehouses and cold stores. And without that support, this project just would not have been possible. So thank you for your support and for everything you do to help buildings and businesses reduce their impact on the environment. We all of us really appreciate our NABERS, but also a lot of people in industry really appreciate your support. So let's dive a little bit into NABERS. So some of you who know about NABERS, this is going to be a short session. You may have seen some of these stats and information before, but if you're not, what is NABERS anyway? What sectors are part of the program to date, and what kind of change have we seen in those sectors, and maybe might foreshadow what we might be able to accomplish working together in warehouses and cold stores. So I'm going to go into my first slide in this opening section. And you may know about this already, but NABERS is a sustainability rating scheme. We're a certification standard for energy and emissions in buildings. And in this case, that means in warehouses and in cold stores. And when we launched this tool as of today, what the star rating means basically is if you get a 3-star NABERS energy rating, it means that your warehouse is using a similar amount of energy against a similar warehouse in the same climate zone of the same size, very similar compared to yours. So it's an average amount of energy and emissions. That is what 3 stars is. If you are 1 star, it means that you are using more than the average. 60 to 70% more energy consumption than an average warehouse. So there's lots of opportunities for improvement and a lot of things that you could do to save energy. But also you can be in the other side of the scale. If a building that is 6 stars or 5 stars, it means you're using significantly less energy and emissions than the average building. So you've done a lot of work and you're doing really well against a lot of your peers. So that is really what the NABERS scale means. NABERS ratings don't last forever. They just last for 1 year. And if you're 4 stars this year and you want to keep promoting yourself as 4 stars, you actually have to make sure that you maintain that performance, that you keep looking at your energy bills, you keep trying to work to use less over time. So that is a NABERS rating in a nutshell, and that's really what the star ratings look like and mean. Now, on our next slide, what we're going to see is that so warehouses and cold stores are new sectors for NABERS, but NABERS is actually one of the longest running sustainability programs in Australia, perhaps the single longest running program. And NABERS has been in a lot of other sectors of the economy, often sectors that are around buildings or campuses. And so NABERS has been around in offices for 25 years and in shopping centers for about 14, 15 years and hotels as well. But also we have rating tools for hospitals and retirement living and in apartment buildings. So a lot of really major buildings that happen to be really big users of energy or emissions or other sources of environmental impact. So that's the focus of area of a program. And warehouses and cold stores are some of the largest building types out there in the non-residential sector. So we're very excited when we started to expand to this sector about 12 months ago. Now, on my next slide, I wanted to show you what NABERS looks like for one building, a building that has been in NABERS for a long time. So obviously it's in a different sector what NABERS has been around for some time. This is an office building, and I wanted to I picked Australia Square because it's such an iconic building. It's a building that was the tallest building in Australia for over a decade during the 1970s and 1980s. And it's a building that when the building was certified and joined NABERS for the first time, didn't have a very good rating. It was a 0-star rating in the beginning. It meant that there were lots of opportunities to do better. And so that was their first result. But what happened from that point is that they started to use the star rating to set targets and to see, what can we do to get to 2 stars? And what can we do to get to 3 stars? What can we do this year that is in the realm of possibility for us? Can we work on controls? Can we turn off things at night and on the weekends? And And at some points in the journey, maybe there was a big replacement of equipment planned for, the year 2012 or 2014. Maybe that was a good point to invest on replacing the equipment with better equipment. So this was a building that went through all kinds of strategies, but systematically setting targets year on year and improving. And it went from being, probably what was maybe one of the most inefficient buildings in Sydney at the beginning of this journey to being one of the most efficient buildings in that city at that point. So it's quite a remarkable journey for a long time. Now, obviously, the NABERS star rating is a means to an end. It's a way to communicate a result, but the end goal is not just getting star ratings. The end goal is actually reducing the pressure that our buildings are putting on nature and reducing energy consumption, reducing emissions. So let's look at the journey of reducing emissions for this building, and this is their energy intensity during the same period of time. It literally reduced their energy intensity and emissions by about 2/3, which is remarkable. It's remarkable, but not unique. We've seen a lot of buildings achieve very, very sustained energy savings over time. So that is something that has been quite important to show that we have seen this systematically across lots of buildings. But we wanted to show you one example so you get a sense of the way this works in practice. By the way, my colleague Ron Polito put something really important in the chat, is that we're going to have several instances to answer questions through this presentation. So we'd love to see your questions coming in through the chat, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can. Now, on my following slide on this presentation, so I wanted to zoom out and look at the entire market now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about offices still, and then I'm going to switch to another sector. But we have seen, this is the journey from the financial year 99, so that's 1998, 1999, the late 90s, when NABERS was a very, very young program just being released, all the way to today. And we have seen a significant portion of the building sector and the office market in this case, just growing year on year, and more buildings joining the NABERS program every year. So by this point, we're actually certifying the great majority of office buildings in Australia. The majority of the market is certified under NABERS every year. And pretty much almost every office building you've ever seen has had a NABERS rating, and most of them have had a NABERS rating in the last 12 months. So they've been setting targets for a long time. Now, if we look at the next slide, we can see that this is not just offices. Offices was the first sector that we launched. It started with offices 25 years ago, but today is a program that is trying to cover very significant portions of the entire Australian economy, and it keeps growing over time. And this is another example of a sector that's been on for quite a while, for about 12, 13 years, but not as long as offices. It's shopping centers, and we've seen more and more shopping centers participating in the program. By this point, we believe we are certifying about 2/3 of all the shopping centers in Australia every year. So retail, and this is a sector where NABERS is completely voluntary, but there's a lot of leadership and a lot of shopping centers setting really ambitious targets and saving their emissions very quickly, as we will see in my next slide after this one. So I wanted to zoom out and talk about energy savings, and with a couple of very simple graphs, but just so you can see that we collectively, with the leadership efforts of industry and government policy working together, we've actually been able to unlock energy savings in some sectors at an incredible rate. And so what this is showing is the office sector. And the graph is basically the first time an office is certified under NABERS, we use that as a baseline. We say, well, we know the energy consumption and the emissions of that building that year. And then we say, well, what happens when the building comes back a year later? Are buildings using less energy consumption than in the first rating? Are they actually getting better? And the answer is yes. On average, we see buildings improving by about 3% after just 1 year, a year later after joining NABERS, and then by 5% 2 years later. And it goes on all the way to over 30% or 33% after 10 years. And what I want to show you here, and maybe something really important to note, is that this is not cherry pick. It's not like my first example, which I definitely cherry pick. This is not cherry picking. This is the entire office sector reducing energy consumption. And what's likely, well, the fastest reduction of energy consumption in any sector in the Australian economy, and probably by a low margin, but also the fastest reduction of energy and emissions of any building sector, probably in any country around the world. It's really been a very remarkable transformation. And behind these numbers, what do we have? We have a market of thousands of people getting really creative with lots of projects and intellectual property being created and excellent management and targets and corporate targets, sustainable finance, and an enormous ecosystem that is being able to build around the fact that we have a lot of leadership and a rating tool and policy that is really helping and enable that market. So that's in the office market, but I did want to show you shopping centers, because shopping centers is a different sector. It operates quite differently. But it's also a sector where we've had ratings for so long that we can start doing really meaningful statistics like this one. We have, 2/3 of the market in terms of data. And in shopping centers, we have seen also a very significant reduction of energy consumption year on year from the first time a shopping centers joins NABERS. It's actually even faster than offices. But the thing to keep in mind is that we're certifying most shopping centers, but not all shopping centers. And a lot of the shopping centers that we're not certifying are likely to not be moving as fast as this. So it might be that shopping centers and offices, the entire sector, are moving at a similar rate, but it is actually really remarkable. It kind of shows you that really mass energy savings are possible. And this is the kind of savings that Minister McAllister was just talking about before. When we say there's been almost $1.5 billion in energy savings, it is because some of these sectors are reducing energy and setting targets at such a fast rate that they've seen just enormous energy efficiency and financial benefits as they do. So on my next slide, and final slide for this segment, I wanted to show you a little bit of what something that is you can only find in Australia right now, which is the Sustainable Portfolios Index 2022. It literally is a public register of about 54 different companies, where they are not only certifying all the buildings and every NABERS rating at every asset, but they're also actually aggregating all of those through a portfolio indicator and actually displaying them publicly for everybody. Company after company right next to each other is the only fully public disclosure of performance like this that you will find anywhere. And it's really a demonstration of how far some of these sectors have moved once they've been setting targets for a long time, and how confident they are in the environmental credentials and how transparent they have become in saying, because when you have 54 companies disclosing on this, only one of them is going to be the number one, and all the other ones are not going to be number one. So when they're participating in disclosing this transparently, they're kind of saying, we're confident when we are on a journey to net zero emissions. Yes, we're not at net zero right now, but we are going to be really transparent, and we're going to be leaders both on saving energy and emissions, and also on being really transparent, really robust about the way we go about it. So it's a really exciting thing to see, just one of the many reflections of the maturity that can happen when we certify our emissions really robustly, when we disclose them, and when we link them across everything we do as businesses and organizations. So on my next slide, I'm going to move. We're gonna close off that phase on, that was a brush over what NABERS is, and obviously we have a lot more information about that. One thing you might be interested in is that if NABERS is new to you, we actually have a free course called Essentials on our website that you can just go in. It's an online course where you can go quite a bit deeper into what NABERS is, how it works, the kind of information that we get on ratings. And so if you're interested in that, feel free to go to our website and find the NABERS Essentials course, which is of course free for anyone to do at any point when you want. So we're going to move into the next item of our agenda, which is my colleague Suruchi Pathak from NABERS, she's the manager of the team of which is several people in NABERS that help build this tool and work with industry really closely on creating this new line of work for NABERS, warehouses and cold stores. Suruchi we've been working for a couple of years. It's always a pleasure to work with you. I know a lot of people in this call work very closely with you on creating this tool, and I'm sure that you are more excited than anyone after so much work on the past year. Suruchi, over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Carlos. A few of you already know me, but I'll introduce myself, and Carlos has introduced me myself. My name is Suruchi, and I lead the exciting work of expanding NABERS Energy rating tool into new building sectors. And I had the privilege to lead the energy rating tool development for the two very crucial sectors, warehouses and cold stores. So today is so exciting for me and the whole NABERS team that we are releasing this rating tool for the industrial sector. It's just the right time for us to reflect back and see what we started, how we reached to where we are now, So in my presentation, I'll talk at a high level about the tool and the next steps if you're an industrial owner or a tenant or an assessor to get you started. So where did we start? Now, we started with lots of questions, lots of uncertainty, like most projects do, but this one had some extra flair to it. We were told this sector is really challenging to benchmark. There is a massive difficulty to gather data, unlike offices or shopping centers, and hence we should have a big contingency plan. But I can say today that when there is a massive support and we all come together, it just opens up all the avenues. And therefore, when there's not one, but a lot of people pushing this ball to the top of the hill, it can all work together. So where are we now? Let's see. We have support of 36 organizations with 78 representatives all spread around these organizations. We have 7 peak bodies and about 14 expert consultants that formed our advisory group. The tool involved a lot of work from the amazing NABERS team and our expert consultants, ZultiQ team. Special thanks to Paul Bannister, Grace Fu, and George Wang, who led this project, who helped us with their technical expertise through this project. And I would say, as the minister said earlier in her speech, when government, industry, and community come together, we can make this journey to net zero emissions easier and faster. And this tool is an example of how collaboration can make a difference. Now, before I move further, I'd like to thank each one of you who's been a part of this journey and send my special thanks to James Els, who's our head of product development, who had his faith in me and my team and his guidance, which helped us reach here today. And my lovely expansion team, Mank and Matilda, who worked tirelessly, the wider NABERS team who've been involved in be it rules, be it training, be it comms, and a number of other things to make this happen. Here's a list of all the organizations who've been a part of this development. I'd like to thank all our stakeholders without whose support this would not have been possible. A special thanks to RWTA and Marianne Menzel, because if it was not for RWTA and its members, we would not have cold stores rating benchmark today. I'd once again like to thank Commonwealth for their support and for funding this project. So how did we develop the tool? Let's dive into the journey of the tool. With the help from our advisory group and industry experts, the very first step we did was data collection. So we collected about 500 or so data sets. We filtered it down based on data quality to 156 or so. We then went through crunching the data to connect dots between various parameters and the consumption to develop the benchmark. That's called the technical benchmarking phase. We then developed the rules to ensure that the ratings remain always fair and robust. And parallel to that, we run a pilot rating to test the benchmark. Now, this pilot phase was a great success. We had 17 pilot ratings undergo a rating, and at this moment, we have them all certified. I think 2 of them couldn't undergo certification because of lack of data or eligibility, but the rest of them are all certified. We had 8 warehouses, 7 gold stores, and 2 mixed facilities which have undergone the pilot phase. And all of those ratings have resulted in a rating from 0 to 4.5 star. With an average of, I would say, 3. And that's a start, as Carlos mentioned, that's a start for them. And that's what you would expect when you would create a benchmark. Moving on to the next step, we've now delivered assessor training. Sorry, can I have my previous slide? Yeah, thank you so much. So we've now delivered assessor training, which was delivered in August, and we had 121 assessors who attended the training. Now we've got 72 assessors who've passed and have completed their accreditation, and they are all ready to get started for this tool. Once you're looking for your rating, you should have a number of assessors out there who are ready to help you get started. Parallel to that, we also have our online platform development for assessors to start rating, and this has been almost complete now. Our development team has been working tirelessly, and the assessors who passed will receive the access logins in next few weeks. So the assessors who pass, please keep an eye for that. That'll be next few weeks when you will have access to platform and start creating ratings. And this brings us to the end of this product development journey, which is the rating tool launch. And hence, it is actually a start for a whole big building sector to get started. Now, what can we rate? What are the facilities this tool will be able to rate? The very first one is general warehouses, so which would cover logistics and distribution centers. So if you have an individual warehouse, you can rate with this tool, or you have an independent cold store. So the spaces which are refrigerated below 0 degrees Celsius, and if they are individual cold stores or cool rooms, they can be rated. And if there is a combination of warehouse and cold stores, they can also be rated. What we cannot rate using this tool is any manufacturing facilities, so-called factories or self-storage sites in terms of industrial. Now let's talk about what sort of setting or what sort of type of buildings can we rate with this benchmark. The premises to be rating can be either a single building. As you can see, the first one is where there's one tenant and there's one building. This is the most common setup, and you can rate that using this benchmark. There's also a second setup, which is also quite common, where there's one tenant, but it's spread out into multiple buildings on a complex. So you can also rate that tenant as well, who's got multiple buildings spread out on a complex. Then there's a third scenario where there is a building which is multi-tenanted, and an individual tenant out of that multi-tenanted building wants to get their rating or wants to know their footprint or their environmental performance, and that they can also rate using this benchmark. And the fourth one is where there's a multiple tenanted building and an owner would like to rate the whole building, including all the multiple tenants. That's also doable. So the benchmark is pretty smart and will cater to all the ways where how warehouse buildings actually exist. Now, what will exactly the benchmark cover in terms of energy coverage? Let's talk about that. I won't go too much into detail, but the minimum energy coverage of the rating tool will include anything from lighting and power, any refrigeration or air conditioning, and any internal transport like conveyor belts, forklifts, or any sorting equipment in the warehouse. There's also exterior lighting or car power lighting, which will also form the use of this energy consumption. And then any supporting facilities like any communal areas or offices, kitchens, or any areas for staff. So all the energy consumption from any of these part of the buildings would form the part of this benchmark. I'll move on to my next slide there. So when we did statistic analysis to verify the relationship or the strength of the relationship between site attributes or parameters and energy use, we identified these parameters for a rating tool. So we've got conditioned area and non-conditioned area, which would be depicting how big the building is. The bigger the building, the more the consumption. And the same way, we've got cold room and cool room volume, which would depict how big the cold storage is, and hence it would use more energy. And then we also have got full-time equivalent workers and weekly operating hours. Weekly operating hours is quite self-explanatory. If a warehouse or a cold store works 24/7, it will obviously use a lot of energy, and hence a benchmark will account for that. So moving on to my next slide there. We know we're moving towards automation. Our warehouse and cold store buildings, with technology advancing, is moving towards a large automated piece. In next few years, we might have a lot of automated warehouses out there. We therefore have an option to choose between two parameters to reflect site intensity. So you could either use full-time equivalent workers, or you could use annual turnover ratio. So if your site is highly automated, annual turnover ratio may be a better representative for your rating, and vice versa. So this solution ensures that our rating tool remains future-proof. Now let's move into how you can get started into your rating experience, and it's so exciting. So I'll move on to a few steps how you can get started for your rating. So the very first step is to find a NABERS assessor. So we've got now 72 accredited assessors. You can easily look up on our website for them. In a few days, you should be able to see all the assessors who've passed. We only found out about our assessors yesterday only, and we've got a big chunk already who have been accredited. The next step would be to gather the data for your 12 months of consumption. So it would be your electricity bills, gas bills, or LPG bills or diesel bills. So you gather all your 12 months of energy consumption, and then you would start working with your assessor who can visit the site and validate the rating. And these assessors can also be engaged for additional energy efficiency advice at the same time to improve the rating for future. So at NABERS, we say this is the cycle of measurement, management, and improvement. Once you measure, you know where you sit, you can start to manage your site, and then you start to improve your site, and then you measure back again with your NABERS rating, and you know how much you've improved. Now let's talk about the fees or cost to calculate or to lodge a NABERS rating. So there's two components to it. One of them is NABERS lodgement fee, and the second one is assessor fee. That varies with the complexity of the building and other factors. So you would engage an assessor for different services, and it'll depend on each assessor, what their fee is. But for NABERS lodgement fee, at this moment, we've got a great offer, which is 50% discount on the lodgement fee for any first rating, and all warehouse and cold store ratings are going to be the first rating. So I'd say this offer is for 12 months. So any first ratings which come through this year would get a 50% discount on the lodgement fee. We've also got a very I would say very enticing offer, energy starter offer in New South Wales, through which you can access up to $3,000 for a rating, which can cover your assessor fee or lodgement fee either. So contact us if you would like to know more about these offers, and we can help you get started. Now, this is a snapshot of our rating platform, NABERS Perform, that assessors will use to calculate the rating. And if you're a building tenant or an owner, you can be included in the contact, and you will have the visibility of the rating. Or if an assessor would like to include both building tenant and the building owner, that could also be done. So the platform would be able to help assessors enter those inputs, calculate the rating, and also talk to the people who are involved in the rating. As I said, the platform is all under progress, and we should have the assessors should have access to the platform in the next couple of weeks. They should have their logins coming into their mailbox really soon. Assessors who passed will get, as I said, if they've already got an access to platform, they should be able to see warehouse and cold store rating right in NABERS Perform. And if they haven't, they'll get their new login and passwords. So, like I just talked about, to find an assessor, I just want to direct you to our website where you can go to find an assessor page and sort through location, rating, or building type to look for assessors who can help you. So that's a very good point to start if you're looking and thinking that I should get started for my NABERS rating or the very first NABERS rating. So I'll talk about some very useful tools as well that you can find on our website. A quick estimate of rating, that's not a full-fledged rating, but can give you an estimate. For example, when you can enter inputs like cold store volume and your energy consumption, you should be able to get an estimate. It's not a full-fledged rating, but you will get an estimate to look at where you're sitting. And then there's reverse calculator, which is a great tool which helps to plan and work backwards. So you could have target to achieve a rating, and then you could work backwards on what sort of consumption in these variables would make you help reach that particular rating. There's also a prediction tool which can help you see how your rating will change in future with the decarbonization of the grid. So that would mean if your building is using more fossil fuels, you would rate poorer down the track in future as the grid decarbonizes. So this prediction tool is also a great help to see how you'll fare in the next 5 years or so. Last but not the least, I would like to bring to your attention that in addition to the rating tool, we would have a commitment agreement product available soon as well. And what is a commitment agreement? Commitment agreement helps owners and developers to model the building, ensure that it is designed to achieve a specific rating when it's actually in operation. So it is bridging the gap between the design and performance, which is seen quite often. So you're committing to a star rating, you're building or you're designing your building so that it is operating in the same sort of star rating when it's actually in operation or when it's occupied. And if you would like to know more about commitment agreements, definitely get in touch with us. But we should have this tool also available, I would say, in next few weeks or so. So before I hand over to Carlos for panel session, I'd like to once again thank our advisory group by sharing some happy faces who've helped us with their time in data collection. A number of hours they've devoted in collecting data, a number of hours they've devoted in collecting, all the data and the bills for pilot ratings, and their expertise, which has come through these advisory groups. So a big thank you to everyone for helping us, reaching this point today. And I'm so excited about that. I'll hand over to you, Carlos, for
Thank you,
the next
Richie. And
panel
before you
session.
go too far away, we've been getting a lot of really good questions. So maybe before we go into the panel, and let's spend a minute or two trying to answer a few of them quickly. So I'll ask you a couple. It's a few about energy coverage, what's included on the rating. So I'm going to ask the first one from David is, so Richie, you mentioned general plug-in power is included, but one of the images didn't reference general power. So is general power in a warehouse or in a cold store included in the rating?
Absolutely, it is. It is.
Perfect. The next question. Oh,
anything we're using, I just wanted to add that, Carlos, anything we're using to support warehouse operations. So any power we're using, which is supporting what's happening in warehouse, is a part of the consumption.
Brilliant. The next one is very aligned with that, is from Greg. Are forklifts only included in the assessment when they are electric, or are gas-powered forklifts included as well?
Absolutely, all forklifts. So that'll help us move towards electric forklifts, given we are electrifying. But whether it's gas, whether it's electric, they are part of your warehouse operations, and all the energy involved will be included.
Perfect. The next one's from Matthew, and is about something that is included, is present in some cold stores, but not in others. So blast freezing is an energy-intensive process that some cold stores undertake. How will this be handled in the rating?
That's a really good question. Blast freezes are not a part of our consumption. We have determined blast freezes as something which is changing a product from one form to another. For example, you're changing them from liquid to frozen. So a blast freeze energy would be excluded out of this, and hence we recommend the cold stores who have blast freezes to start sub-metering them and exclude that energy.
Great, and that was a really good question, because it was a point of a lot of discussion with the working group, and partly because some facilities really had that, but in others was completely absent in such a big energy user that made it very difficult to compare assets if we actually include in the rating. So thank you everybody for a lot of the feedback that we got. So Richie, I might go through one or two more, and then we go into the panel, and the ones that we don't get to answer, we'll bring them into the end, because we'll have a little bit more time in there as well. This one from Andrew right at the top. First question, and I should have answered right away, is will there be a water rating for warehouses? And I might just take that one quickly, so Richie. So Andrew, we're not releasing a NABERS water for warehouses for a couple of reasons. One of them was that water consumption, we did collect a lot of data on water, and water is very, very inconsistent between how it's used by different types of organizations. So some of them use almost no water and it's very small, and others use a lot of water because they happen to have some processes, like actual process laws on the facility. So we really struggled to find a way to be able to compare, to a meaningful comparison against a lot of buildings in this space. So we're not releasing a NABERS water tool at this point. It doesn't mean that we will never have a NABERS water tool, but at this point in time, we're only releasing a NABERS energy tool. So I'm going to pause there. There's a couple more questions that I will definitely bring later on, but I really like to thank Suruchi for now. Suruchi, you might want to stay stand by, because we might have a couple more questions for you as well. And some of these questions we'll also try to answer on the chat as well as we go along. Thank you, Suruchi. And we will be moving on to our panel and to our amazing panelists for a discussion today into warehouses and cold stores. We have three amazing panelists. Some of you may know some of them. If you haven't, I want to first introduce you to the amazing Lisa Hinde, long-term member of the NABERS community and National Director of Sustainability at Colliers. Welcome, Lisa. We also have with us Frankie Muskovic. He is the National Policy Director at the Property Council. Frankie is also the State stakeholder chair of the NABERS Steering Committee, and also the co-host of the Let Me Sum Up podcast. So a woman of many talents. Welcome, Frankie. And last but not least, we have Luke Menzel, the CEO of the Energy Efficiency Council, Vice President of the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, or ASPEC, and also the host of the First Fuel podcast. So what a roster. These people make me feel very self-conscious about my own very much more modest personal talents. And look, if you're on the line, we cannot see you at the moment with your video.
I am on the line, and someone stopped my video at some point, so I'm not allowed to turn it on. So maybe you're there.
Great.
We go. Hello.
We'll work on that on the background. There you go. There we can see you, and we can see that Melbourne must be a very sunny day today. Look, the lighting looks great. So we're going to move into our first questions. We have lots of questions for you, but also we have a very inquisitive attendees today in the session, so I strongly encourage you to ask your questions. I'm going to try to only use a couple of my questions that I have on my drawer prepared. So please feel free to shoot any questions to our panelists, and we go right through them. Frankie, let me start with you. We are at a very critical point in Australia's journey towards net zero emissions. It's no longer 40 or 50 years in the future. It's looking closer and closer every year. Why do you think action on warehouses and coasters in these two sectors is so important in Australia's journey to net zero emissions?
Thanks, Carlos, and really lovely to be here with this group of people, and congrats to the NABERS team on the launch today. We're in the critical decade, right? And when we started talking about 2030 as a horizon for serious climate action, that was a few years ago, and our time is sort of fast running out. And when we look at the way our economy's been reconfigured, it's not like nothing's happened in the last couple of years. We've had a pandemic that I think really accelerated a lot of changes that were already happening in our economy. So, rapid digitization, the growth of e-commerce has been enormous. I think we doubled the amount of online sales between 2018 and last year. And that directly translates to demand in space for warehousing, the asset class that we're talking about here. So it is a enormous and growing sector of the built environment. And, and it presents some really significant opportunities as well from a sustainability perspective. Maybe one of the other observations I'd make as well is that the really significant impouring of investment into this asset class has come from a lot of institutional capital as well. And so they're the same members who've had a really long-standing commitment to NABERS through other asset classes like commercial offices and shopping centres. So they're really, well placed and experienced to do heavy lifting in this space and act quickly.
That is great. And look, Lisa, I might just invite you to jump in on that question as well. Net zero emissions is maybe the greatest task that we're ever undertaking collectively as a planet. Why do you think really zeroing in and focusing on warehousing cold stores is a really important thing to do in the next few years?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think just in terms of net zero, how we're quantifying it for different asset classes is, quite varied. So for the warehouse sector, it's, you could look at the way that we're moving products and how we're quantifying logistics in the terms of movements of trucks and movements of freight as part of that overall profile. And we know that scope 3 can't be ignored at this point. And so I think just in terms of meeting that net zero economy, I don't think you can really stop at the door when it comes to this sector. And I know that's definitely outside the remit of the NABERS tool at this stage, but with the move of NABERS into embodied carbon and looking at different phases, who knows what the next iteration of this tool will encapsulate. But to Frankie's point, I think our investors, particularly in Australia, and global investors, they like the transparency of what we offer in terms of providing that step-by-step move towards a net zero economy. And I think the steps that we can take using tools like NABERS to help speed up that transparency, identify where the improvements can be made based on this methodology is certainly a really important aspect that we can all engage with.
Yeah, Carlos, I guess Frankie and Lisa have said it all really. The only thing I'd add for those on the call that are relatively new to NABERS. The Energy Efficiency Council has members, NABERS assessors, but also organisations that work closely with all parts of the economy to improve their energy performance. And as a corollary of that, their emissions profile. And it has long been the case that it's a lot easier to work with the commercial building sector, those parts of the commercial building sector that are covered by NABERS, because you've got that very clear benchmark. You've got that performance-based tool against which you can measure yourself, not just against what you did last year, but also against your peers. So they can give you it just creates this virtuous circle where you can find out where you are, you can do your stuff, do some stuff within your own business, and you can improve your performance. And it just grounds the whole conversation. And when you put that in the context of the transition to net zero, because NABERS is focused ultimately on emissions, that means it takes what can be a very sort of hashtaggy, sort of high level, big picture thing to something that's very grounded within a particular business in a particular place, and the actions that can be taken within your sector. And that's the great value of NABERS. It actually takes the time to get to know particular sectors and importantly subsectors across the economy and works out how they tick. And I'm sure many of the stakeholders that are on this call that have been on the journey with Saruchi and others is that they would attest that this is something that you and the team take very, very seriously, and you've done your homework. And I think where you've landed is a really smart place, which will support this new sector, which NABERS has built a relationship with on that net zero emissions journey.
That is great, Luke. And go on, Frankie.
Well, I saw a question pop up in the chat, and it was sort of a direct follow-on from your comments, Luke, asking what other countries are doing in this area. And I think, certainly some of us on this panel would reflect, based on recent international experience, that, I think we're the envy of the world when it comes to NABERS, having travelled over to Europe earlier this year for an international exchange on what we're doing in energy efficiency in buildings. We actually have a lot to teach the rest of the world in the commercial building space. And so far as we can see, and I'd certainly be happy to be proved wrong, because we're always shamelessly looking to steal good ideas from people. But there isn't anything like NABERS elsewhere, especially when you look at countries that have more aggressive stances on climate policy, or have done so for a much longer period of time. The European market is a perfect example of that. They require energy performance certificates as a form of disclosure, and it's just a number that tells you nothing and doesn't allow you to compare or benchmark your performance from one similar building type to another. It's effectively meaningless information. Hence, we're very proud of the work that NABERS does, because it means we do get to lead on international benchmarks because of the fact that we've had robust frameworks like NABERS in place.
And just to add to that as well, I think, you're looking around the world at the net zero targets that have been proposed, and to have a tool like NABERS in place in Australia and in other countries means that you can actually quantify how you're performing against those emissions reductions in a very real way. And the more buildings that adopt NABERS and can quantify their emissions, the closer we'll be to accuracy around our modelling to achieve net zero, particularly with the huge percentage of buildings that contribute to emissions per year. I think it shows a really scientific way of continuing to improve in line with those targets. So you kind of wonder where those figures come from in other countries that don't have a similar tool, like how they're able to hand on heart say they're going to meet those targets.
Frankie, go ahead.
No, I saw a reference to CREM being one of those.
I was going to say, given that we are on the
benchmark.
topic of international, for those of you who may know what CREM is, and I always forget what the acronym actually stands for, Frankie, but it's basically it's a European initiative. That's how it started, and what they were saying setting is basically a path for buildings to reduce energy and emissions, basically a trajectory of that buildings should try to stay under in terms of the energy energy consumption and emissions year on year. That's really at a high level what they were trying to do. Started as a European, still very European, and there's some efforts about trying to improve the first iteration of that benchmark, and B, trying to make it more relevant to countries outside of Europe. Frankie, I know that you've been quite involved in that with our friends at the Grimlin Council as well. Do you have anything that you want to mention in that?
Just that I would lump them in with the sorts of initiatives we wouldn't seek to replicate here, but that benchmarks like GRESB are looking at CREM as something to reference, and so it's important that we lean in and try and improve what they do. So yes, us and our friends at the Green Building Council, as well as yourselves, have contributed a lot of time and data, working directly with the team in that. I know that criticism has been that it's basically setting the lowest possible benchmark and not really encouraging leadership, and that was sort of the view that a lot of our members have maintained over time. That said, the European market is influential. A lot of investment comes from there, so they've to date, they've taken the feedback well, and we understand they're incorporating that, but I guess we'll have to wait and see what the results bear out.
There's a question that has come up a couple of times about, and look, I'm going to put you on the spot in a minute, but I'm going to provide a partial answer first. There's been two questions about what might happen about the mandatory disclosure of energy performance. There's one from Mark before and one from David more recently. And I think the answer to that is that some of you may know that NABERS is mandatory in one sector, and that's the office sector. That was done through Commonwealth government legislation, so it's a Commonwealth government responsibility. And we have recently changed, have a new government. It's very early on in the life of that new government. So the answer is that at the moment there aren't any news about the commercial building disclosure program and what may happen in the future. But what I might be interested in hearing from you, Luke, because you've seen a lot of what that did in practice, and maybe some reflections on what do you think that it's been 12 years since disclosure in the office sector in Australia. What does the sector look like in practice today? And what are some of the things that you've seen in that market that have come out from that policy?
Well, I mean, the word I heard you use was transparency. So it just creates that incredible transparency and that clear benchmark around where you are relative to your peers. And that allows you to put a value on something which is often pretty intangible, which is, energy performance, energy efficiency. And the value can then be quantified, communicated as it is on the front of office buildings right around Australia, so that potential purchasers of commercial property and potential tenants of commercial property can then factor it into their buying decisions. And what have we seen over the last 10 or 12 years? We've seen that they really do value this. There's been a premium placed on buildings with higher NABERS ratings for all the obvious reasons that those of us that are sort of immersed in this space know well, but others that aren't sort of commercial building nerds perhaps haven't quite appreciated. Like, they're better places to work. People tend to have better health outcomes and be more productive in those buildings. There's higher asset values that are associated with high NABERS rating buildings. Carlos, Frankie, Lisa, you could probably add 3 or 4 other dot points to that list, but the vibe is it actually creates a market around something which is otherwise intangible. Now, I think the important thing to say into the context of disclosure is that there's different drivers in different markets, and the types of value that might be created in warehouses and cold stores are going to be distinct to the value that is created in the office sector. But there's some important drivers there as well, which I can talk about a little bit if you like. I think we've talked a bit about net zero. We've talked a bit about emissions reduction. That's obviously a massive driver in this space. But there's another very immediate driver, which is bananas energy prices. So at the start of this year, wholesale electricity costs in most places around Australia are bouncing around $30 to $40 a megawatt hour. They peaked well over $350 a megawatt hour in most places, and they're now sitting over $100 megawatt hour. So they've come off a bit, and people are breathing a deep sigh of relief, but they're still 3 to 4 times what they were at the start of the year. And unfortunately, because of the geopolitical situation we find ourselves in, because of the demand that we're seeing around the world for coal and gas, it's hard to say when it's going to drop below $100 a megawatt hour again. And so, for cold stores and warehouses that are relying on electricity and gas as a key input for various parts of their operations, having a clear benchmark that you can use to actually bring down your costs, just to manage costs with your own businesses, but also importantly, or sort of support the great national effort we have at the moment to deal with sort of cost of living pressures. We are in the midst of a cost of living crisis, and supply chains are, one key element of that. There are just so many good reasons to have a really clear line of sight to what's going on in your business right now. And NABERS can be an incredible partner in giving cold stores and warehouses the data they need to act on that important imperative.
And I think if I could just add to that as well, because I think they're incredibly pertinent points just in terms of what we're seeing from tenants within properties that we're managing. It's the first time that they're actually actively involved in wanting to provide a lot of their data. Previously, it was, behind closed doors. We kind of want to guard how we're managing our properties in triple net leases. But now with the pinch on energy prices really, really coming down hard, they're seeking that support from landlords, and know that the landlords have the purchasing power to alleviate a lot of the conditions that they're facing. And they're making decisions on renewals based on the appetite for landlords to support them on that journey. So we've had an unprecedented level of requests for sub-metering, for solar feasibilities, for reviewing electric vehicle charging stations on properties under management. And that's all a result of a decarbonising sector that is not necessarily decarbonising because they want to at this point in time. I mean, I'm sure there's some that would love to as part of just their normal operations, but they're seeing it as a way to reduce their operational costs, and that collaboration that's taking place is good timing for a NABERS warehouse and cold stores tool, I would say.
Lisa, and I'm actually really interested in your role, and as an organization, you reach lots of different organizations in lots of different sectors, and I'm quite curious. One of the things that came, there's a couple of questions about the fact that you do see some owner occupiers in both in cold stores and warehouses, but you also see a lot of tenants, and every time you have any sector structure around tenants and owners, you have some split incentives, and who's going to pay for those solar panels and who benefits, and that is something that I don't think in NABERS rating is going to be like the solution to all those problems. It's just good to acknowledge that is a tension that often happens when you have tenants and owners. But what are you seeing in this section? What do you think are maybe some strategies to come to the table if you have a tenant that is really interested and maybe the owner is not, or an owner that really wants to drive action and maybe the tenant is a bit disengaged? What are you seeing, examples when this works? What are the things that are at the table, and what are some approaches that companies that want to do action in this space are bringing to make projects happen?
Yeah, so I mean, prior to the current conditions, we saw that landlords were purely focused on obtaining data mainly for their own reporting purposes. So whether it was for, say, Green Star performance rating or for their GRES reporting, it was a way to catch the data, but not necessarily have plans in place to openly collaborate past that point. And that was the old days. And now we're seeing a move from both sides to want to move forward with collaboration in this space, not only for the reporting purposes of the landlord, but to drive those changes, to see those benchmarks and work out the next step in their decarbonisation strategy. I guess, from what we're seeing with the introduction of the new NABERS tool, there was commentary from the beginning, particularly in the advisory, around whose responsibility it was to conduct the rating, given that the occupier controlled the space, but then ultimately the landlord would benefit from that rating in their own reporting and transparency for their investors around how that facility was operating and where it was performing. And I think there was, certainly a justified, not really apprehension, but I guess cautiousness about the landlord, because they couldn't necessarily be held accountable for the operations of a tenant who controls the facility. So they didn't necessarily want to be penalized. And so what we're seeing is this joint relationship forming where landlords, if they're moving towards or involved in this space, what they're doing is they're updating their design briefs to reflect the requirements from a prescriptive perspective, to make sure that the right meters are in place, make sure that their architectural plans are showing, what's needed from a NABERS rating, looking at ways to provide, I guess, the best soft landing stage for an occupier to come in and be able to take that journey themselves in terms of monitoring and keeping an eye on their own performance. And I think, that's been received quite well from the couple that we've seen that have adopted that strategy, because ultimately, I don't think it should be the landlord that, bankrolls the NABERS rating year on year, but I think there's definitely an element of making it an easier process on behalf of the occupier to facilitate that.
That's great, Lisa. And I might just I'm gonna put Frankie and Luke on the spot with something that is this is not part of the NABERS rating, but it's part of the barriers that we need to tackle collectively in this sector. So it's a question from Stefan about how difficult it is to get tertiary qualifications on just like managing industrial refrigeration, engineering, energy efficiency. It's about like skills gaps and difficulties in getting access to suitable degrees and training programs, but also perhaps about like the limited capacity at the moment, number of professionals that are needed to be able to drive change at scale. I know both of you have been talking a lot about that in the last few months at the political level and with your members. And what do you think, how important do you think is for all of us to work and focus on building skills? And what do you think are some key gaps that need urgent attention?
Maybe I'll open, but I'll quickly throw to Luke because I feel like it's more his territory. It's a massive agenda. And when we look at some of the emerging challenges, I know a lot of us talk about electrification as one of the, the really emerging challenges around moving away from fossil fuels in buildings. There are whole swathes of even current existing professionals that need upskilling and training to help manage that transition for us. And there isn't a plan or a set of policies that's sitting with us yet that's going to drive that. And we know we need that, and we need it at scale. This sector is another where the introduction of a NABERS rating tool is really going to help grow the market and demand for that skill set. So we really need to be doing everything we can to meet that demand as soon as possible by calling on the existing pool of professionals that work in other areas to make sure that they can extend their capacity to cover this, and then think about how we get a pipeline of talent coming down the line.
I think what Frankie just laid out there is really helpful in terms of a distinction between like skills that are nominally out in the market now and they're kind of relatively well understood. We just need to scale them up, and new and novel skills that actually we need to create whole new professions to kind of electrify heating load in commercial buildings and do that really rapidly over the next decade. For my sins, for the Energy Efficiency Council sins, we're involved in this conversation right around the country. I think that when we talk about clean energy jobs, there is a tendency to talk about people stapling solar panels to the top of houses, or people building transmission lines, or whatever it is. And that they are absolutely clean energy jobs. They're important jobs. They're very visible jobs. But if you think about it, I would argue that at least half, and probably a lot more than half, of the task of achieving a net zero economy is actually happening behind the meter, and transforming the processes that are happening in buildings and warehouses and cold stores and manufacturing sites and mines, farms right around the country. And there is, and Frankie's right, there is a bit of a void in terms of how we build out those professional pathways on the demand side. It is an agenda that's starting to generate a bit of momentum. There's good work happening in New South Wales. I'm a part of the Victorian government's Clean Economy Skills Jobs Task Force, which has been thinking deeply about this topic. I note that the Queensland government's new energy and jobs plan has this agenda as a critical focus, and they've brought in the demand side piece into that. That's work that is to be done, but that they've committed to. And of course, Chris Powen and Jenny McAllister convened a clean energy jobs summit in the lead up to the broader summit that took place in Canberra just a month ago. So this is something that, we can say this as stakeholders. This is not news to our political leaders, but I think it's incumbent on all of us that are interested in the broader transition that we just keep banging on about the fact you cannot forget about the demand side, because you forget about the demand side, we do not hit net zero on the timelines that we need to.
Yeah, look, and I think that point is just so important, that we are dealing with the greatest transformation that we've ever tried to coordinate collectively globally in an insanely short amount of time, and to think that we can do that with while wasting an enormous amount of energy on the great majority of buildings globally is almost certainly impossible. And
take out the almost, Carlos.
or certainly impossible. And there's been lots of reports and studies showing that we actually need not just a little bit of energy efficiency, we need deep energy efficiency at scale, because otherwise we just won't get it done in time. So it's a really excellent point.
Well, Carlos, I'm going to just take my prerogative as a panelist here, and I agree with you. And luckily, we have convened a summit on this topic. Frankie and I have been working on this along with our friends at AI Group and ACOS. And for those of you that are interested enough to dial into this call, you may be interested to join us at the National Energy Efficiency Summit 2022, which is taking place a small cohort in person, but mostly online next Thursday, the 6th of October in the afternoon. And there are sessions on residential, commercial and industrial. We've got Assistant Minister McAllister, who did the pre-recorded address earlier. She's joining us in person and sharing some of her thoughts about where she sees energy efficiency as playing a role in the Albanese government's broader decarbonisation agenda. So I'll stop being cheeky now, Carlos, and stop taking over your webinar, but I will drop a link in the chat.
I think it's an excellent ad, Luke. I'm also speaking at that event, so I think it's all in order. Lisa, there's a question for you, and then I'm going to ask a wrapping question to all our panelists. So I don't know if you might have seen it on the chat, but it's a question about who owns refrigeration units and HVAC in a typical site, and whose responsibility it is to actually upgrade them. What have you seen in your experience?
Yeah, no, good question. And I think, based on the triple net lease arrangements, the landlord would typically own the equipment, but it would be the responsibility of the occupier to service that equipment. And, through the course of understanding benchmarks and how the facility is performing, particularly where we now have a benchmark to compare the performance of the facility to, we can start to drill down into the detail around, okay, are those units inefficient? Would we look at cycling those out? And that discussion can happen directly between the tenants and the landlord, I guess, with a bit more transparency with a tool like the warehouse and cold stores tool. Previously, it was, if there was sub-metering in place, then that would definitely help. But it was by no means a benchmark to compare to other sites unless you had that full portfolio to compare it to. So I think, we'll see a lot more collaboration for upgrading that equipment, I think, in line with better performing assets.
Great, and so I'm going to ask you a quick wrapping up question. None of you are prepped for these questions. I'm going to put Luke first on the spot with this, and then you'll get the same question.
Frankie, that
Lisa.
Putting us on the spot is also known as just asking us a question.
Well, that's right. That is right. So my question to you is: this is day one for this new rating tool. A lot of people might be the first exposure to this rating tool. What is maybe one tip that you'll give to someone who's on this call? Either one thing that you think that they could do, or one thing that they should keep in mind. What is one takeaway that you'd like to leave them with?
Oh, look, I would say that one of the things that we've really learned from our experience in other sectors is that you can achieve an awful lot through tuning and improving your maintenance practices, and that and sometimes quite significantly in terms of star ratings, which obviously flows through in terms of emissions and energy costs. This is not a scenario where it's always about making really significant capital investments, which is not always possible. So there is an investment, obviously, which is then, there's some support available in different places for that initial NABERS rating, but it's not necessarily the case that this has to be a big, expensive process, although in the longer term it can give you some guidance about where those big investments might be best placed. So just thinking about those different levels, it's not all about spending heaps of money. You can actually save a lot of money by making some relatively small tweaks, and that can particularly be in the case for very energy intensive businesses like cold stores.
Frankie.
I think my tip follows on from that, because I saw a question in the chat about what is the follow-up after the assessment once you've done your first NABERS rating. And my suggestion there is your NABERS assessor is your best friend. So even though we don't have a national energy efficiency target or scheme, we have really effective state schemes in a couple of states, so white certificates that provide a financial incentive for some of those big capital outlays that Luke talked about. But you've also got this incredible pool of professionals to access who have been doing this for a really long time, many of them. And I know a lot of the building owners that I represent and work with, but it's still a lot of trust in those professionals to guide them over that journey. And as Luke said, a lot of the early changes are behavioral and operational and don't necessarily rely on large capital outflows. But if you can develop a relationship with an experienced NABERS assessor, if you don't have them in-house, then they are your best friend, and they're going to be able to also guide you through where some of the government, the existing government programs and incentives are, because they are around and you should take advantage of them.
Thank you. Lisa.
I would say start forward planning now, particularly if you have warehouses and cold stores under your remit. Start having the conversations with your service providers around the types of documentation that you'll need to complete an assessment. I'd also encourage people, I know that there's a sentiment in industry that if you get a poor rating, it's game over for you, and that's the end of that. And it's not, this tool's obviously not suited to my assets because I'm performing terribly. I would see that as the opportunity to apply for grants or apply for improvement steps that can be taken to move your rating up, because you're only getting rated if you're benchmarked against others, and if others are performing better, there's always the option that your facility can improve as well. So in this industry, we love seeing an improvement tail. We love seeing the Australia Post of the world come through the system and exceed everyone's expectations. So don't be afraid to lean into some of the criteria and work on those improvements over time.
Great. Lisa Hinde, Frankie Muskovic, Luke Menzel, you have been great. I know how busy you are, and each of you is making a massive difference in sustainability and the environment. So thank you for being here, and thank you for everything you do to progress this really important work in net zero and the environment.
Likewise, Carlos. Thank you.
Congrats to you and the team.
Absolutely. Thanks, Carlos.
Thank you. So we have a couple of minutes, and just to wrap up, there's a couple of additional questions on the chat, and what I'm going to try to do is do a flash answer to a few of them before we close the session. So we had some questions about whether, for example, we are creating a NABERS waste tool for this sector and for warehouses and cold stores. The answer is currently we're not working on that, but it is a possibility for the future. So if you are interested in that, feel free to reach out to us on that. And the lead for a work on waste in NABERS, her name is Sarah Levitt. So you may know Sarah already. If you don't, feel free to just reach out to our main NABERS inbox, which you can find on our website. There are a couple of questions about mandatory disclosure, which I believe we have answered by this point. But if you're interested in that conversation, feel free to reach out to us as well. We're very connected with our colleagues in the Commonwealth Government. Many of them are here as well, so we can also connect you with them if you would like to talk more about that as well. There is a question about manufacturing, like the heavier end of this intersection between buildings and the industrial sector, and so currently we are not going to be certifying manufacturing facilities. It's not impossible that we could go into that space in the future, and if you do work in that space, we'd love to talk to you about that. We're actually currently looking at what are some other sectors where NABERS could expand. We are currently in the process of, once we release this tool, we'll be in the process of expanding NABERS to two very different sectors, to schools and to retail, but actually we have a longer expansion roadmap. So we could consider other facilities that are currently not contemplated in the program just yet. If there are any other questions that I'm missing, if it's a question about how NABERS is different from LEED certification. And I think my biggest, it's difficult question to explain very quickly, but I think the LEED is a rating tool that is that's only used by a few facilities in Australia. Really, the tool in that space that is similar to LEED, that is the main tool in Australia, is the Green Star rating scheme by the Green Building Council of Australia. And Green Star and LEED are very similar. They are different because they're in different countries and evolving differently, but they are a rating tool that covers many different aspects of sustainability. We work very closely with the Green Building Council in the Green Star tool, and NABERS and Green Star are fully integrated. In other sectors where NABERS has been and Green Star have been there for a long time, you see a lot of the leaders certifying the NABERS and Green Star together. And often a NABERS rating is like, the energy credits in Green Star are a NABERS energy rating. So that is the way that we're both very well integrated. There's a couple more questions there's maybe one more question to answer from Peter about products and the embodied footprints of products. And I want to say two things about that. First is that this rating tool, NABERS Energy, is focused on the operational energy performance of this asset. So it doesn't consider the embodied footprint, so the emissions in creating the products that go into a warehouse or into an office or into a hotel. NABERS Energy rating is focused on energy consumption and the operational emissions. But we are, as a program, are currently working on a different rating tool on the embodied emissions for building construction. So if you're building a warehouse or a hotel or an office, you're often using steel and cement and glass and other materials. And we are working on a rating tool to be able to assess, measure, and compare buildings based on that embodied carbon footprint in construction. Different rating tool. I don't want to talk too long about that here, because it's a different project, and it's a project that is a much earlier stage of development. But if you are interested in that space, feel free to reach out to you, and we are doing a lot of engagement in that sector. So we'd love to work with you. So there's a few more questions, but I do need to bring us to the closing of this event. So the questions that we haven't addressed, we're going to get back to you separately through your email. So we should be able to know who all of you are from based on your names and those questions. What I'd like to say is this is the kind of project that takes just many people, like I mentioned at the beginning, to make this happen. There's a couple of organizations, people that I want to give special thanks, and one person in particular, Marianne Menzel, the CEO of the Refrigerated Warehouse and Transport Association, and their members have been really instrumental in, particularly on cold stores. Cold stores was a sector where, as a program, we didn't really have a lot of connections at the beginning of this project. And Marianne has been very generous with her time, her insights, connecting us to our members, giving us an opportunity to just learn about how this sector is working and what can we do to support the sector, and it's been incredibly valuable. And also want to thank to several other organizations, some of them that were already in the NABERS ecosystem, picking those two bodies, but that participated in sectors like offices and hotels, but help us reach other sectors, in and in particular warehouses that we hadn't reached just yet. And in particular, thank you so much to the Property Council, the Energy Efficiency Council, the Green Building Council, and also the Australian Institute of Refrigeration, Air Conditioning and Heating, or ERA. We're going to close it here. The rating tool is out. We have a lot of assessors who have been certified already, and they're basically ready to be able to conduct ratings. We're doing a small IT deployment in the next couple of weeks, after which means any building can be certified, fully certified, and it's really exciting times coming ahead. So I just want to say thank you. We look forward to working with you for years to come. This is the kind of thing that is not a project that we're releasing and now we're not going to do anything more about that. This is day one of the beginning of this next phase, but we have a platform where NABERS and government organizations, we have all the states and territories in the Commonwealth participating in our program and sitting in our board, can come together with industry to try to drive long change in sustainability in warehouses and cold stores. And it's very exciting. We're really looking forward to get to know you better, working with you, and so feel free to reach out to us at any point. We really want to work with you and helping you, with anything we can to help you to reduce your environmental footprint and achieve your organizational targets. Thanks so much, and we look forward to seeing you soon.